the Sounds True Podcast Network.
Look, labels can stifle us and box us in, and they can also set us free. I look at it like, this is probably my autistic wiring. I'm like, there's certain sets of behavior and ways of seeing that somebody with my wiring has. So it's really helpful for me to learn about that.
Welcome to Being Open, Spirituality and the Neurodivergent Mind, a special Insights at the Edge series. My guest is Sarah Taylor, an awakening trail guide and intuitive energy healer who specializes in working with people who identify as neurodivergent and highly sensitive. Sarah Taylor is an award-winning actor and stand-up comedian who started meditating in order to manage her own anxiety and stage fright. And then the experience of meditation opened her to a series of spiritual awakenings. In her 50s, she discovered a life-changing insight that she herself is neurodivergent. She describes herself as being autistic and having ADHD, and how this discovery has been so important. Sarah, you say, and I want to start here, welcome, that discovering your neurodivergence was as big a deal in your life as the spiritual awakening process that you went through. And I thought, really? How is this? Why was it such a big deal for you?
Almost as big, what can be, more profound than realizing like you're not separate, from reality, and awakening. But it felt like a really important piece to the awakening journey, which I find is never ending. Post-awakening, there is continued embodiment and the truth that we see about ourselves. And I've always been a seeker of truth. So learning this about myself just made my life make sense.
Tell me more about that. How did it make your life make sense?
Well, I understood relationships more. I understood my difficulties growing up. I used to have meltdowns, seams on my socks or tags or brushing my hair, huge meltdowns. And I sort of took on this identity as a very young child of being bratty or difficult. And certainly my family probably saw me that way, but I was overstimulated, I was a bit of a weird kid, playing by myself and feeling very awkward about how to learn how to do this human being thing. And it kind of made sense that the dots started connecting. And, I feel that neurodivergent people are wired for awakening. So I also just began really remembering how open and porous and sensitive I really was as a child. And that I had to kind of start shutting it down. And awakening was a process of remembering, of opening something again that was already open. And it just made sense. Suddenly things made sense in a way that they hadn't before.
Now, at one point, I did a series called Waking Up. What does it really mean? And I interviewed 23 people about spiritual awakening. And I want to add you now to the numbers of people that I've asked this question to, which is, tell me what spiritual awakening means to you.
Spiritual awakening is waking up from the sense of a separate self and waking up to the nature of reality, the ground of our being, that there's just one thing happening. It's all source, God, Brahman, true nature. And so this can happen in stages. People start to see through the sense of self, that there may be something more vast, their boundless awareness, they're the witness, they're pure consciousness. And then that moves into the heart. That's kind of a head awakening. It moves into the heart. and seeing the non-dual nature of reality, that I'm you, Tami, and you're me, and I'm the tree outside my window, and I am everything, and everything is me. It's the one taste, as they say in Dzogchen. So that's what I see awakening as, but it's not only punctuated by vivid moments of realization, but it's also a gradual process for everybody who embarks on this journey.
Now, when you say neurodivergent people are wired for awakening, tell me more about that and how you see that. And when you say wired, you mean our brain patterning, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Our system's very porous, very open. As a kid, I knew what my mom was thinking. I knew uh, that there was more in the room with people than what they were presenting. So I could see through layers and see through these things that I was told were the way things are. And so that's really helpful for a seeker on the spiritual path, to be penetrating truth. But there is an openness, a porousness that I think neurodivergent people, especially like late diagnosed autistics and ADHDers, tend to cover up this sensitivity from a young age. And often, like a lot of the people I work with, are so sensitive, and all they needed was a bit of meditation, or they got on the right path for them and something popped for them, and they feel so naked and so raw. And sometimes with holistic brained people, it's a little more of a process to sort of poke through and see that, you're actually something beneath the sense of self that you take yourself to be and that others see. I think that neurodivergent and sensitive people they're like right there. It's a hair's breadth away. What I find is it's the integration of spiritual insights, it's the healing, it's the integration, it's embodiment, it's connecting to the body. A lot of neurodivergent people aren't really connected to their body. I was completely clumsy and didn't really feel like I had a body, and then learned how to like be in it, you know? So, so I think there's some sort of spiritual dimension that's poking through, shining through underneath the surface. I could be wrong, but it's I think more people are starting to talk about this too.
Now, here's a question. It's going to sound a little bit like I'm talking in a circle, but I know you're going to be able to follow me here, Sarah, which
Hey,
is
hit me.
I've heard it described, and in my own experience as well, have felt that with deep, I might just call them, not even use the word like awakening, but transformational experiences, I feel rewired by the experience,
Yes,
meaning I don't see and process the world the same way after the experience than before. There's a different kind of processing happening, openness.
absolutely. Yeah.
So that changes people, these experiences. So you're describing ways in which you connected dots that you were actually neurodivergent from a young age. So my question is, does our inherent neurodivergence from a very young age make us more open to these experiences, or did these experiences change your wiring in such a way that you became no longer neurotypical because you were so changed by the
Yeah.
experiences?
I get what you're saying. I think, yeah, people.
Wonderful. Well, that's a start there. We are
Thank God,
connecting
Tami.
there.
For
Yes,
40
I know.
years you've been doing this. It's like,
I
what?
know, but still, it's so hard.
No, it's really hard to put it into words. But I think, what is neurodivergence anyway? A lot of people will probably ask that listening to this. Um, Once there's been a profound seeing, an insight, a realization, there is a rewiring of our brains. So perhaps people who have undergone some sort of inner transformation are neurodivergent. I think for a lot of late diagnosed or late realized neurodivergent people, it's going back to early childhood and seeing that these things, the certain traits of autism or ADHD were present. And then, what does that mean then after an insight, after a realization, after awakening? I mean, does it even matter? I did wonder that, like, what's the big deal? I've been on a journey of sort of peeling back the layers of who I am over the years anyway. So this is just one more thing that I'm seeing. But as I was telling you, I just somehow knew that I was going to be talking about this, so I sought out a diagnosis. Um, but yeah, I
Tell,
think
tell us about tell us about that journey. First of all, what was going on inside of you that made you seek a diagnosis, and then learning about the diagnosis, how did that help you connect specifically the dots in your life, both?
yeah, um, I think for me at this point where I was looking back on my life and wanting a little bit of clarity or looking at my current life was as far as burnouts go. And burnouts are something that happen to a neurodivergent person because we're not necessarily set up to function in a world that demands certain things, being so porous, so open, and getting overstimulated quite easily. We might need more rest. We need breaks. We need to move our body. I was having these throughout my life, these burnouts where I would go and function as, a normal person of society, normal, and then just hit a wall where I could barely function. And some of these burnouts lasted several years. Now, with the spiritual path and how it began unfolding, these awakenings, these realizations, everything became much smoother, right? So there weren't these these long periods of time because there was a natural unmasking that was happening post realization, post awakening of all these adaptations falling away, right? That happens with spiritual realization. We see through that sense of self we thought we were and all the adaptations to get by in the world and to be a separate entity start dissolving more and more and more. So what was left was me sort of still kind of being awkward in social situations, um, having some sort of the way I sort importance of things. I mean, of course, post awakening, it all became kind of one thing. Noticing executive dysfunctions. I mean, just getting out of the house. It's always been difficult for me. The burnout, the way I engage in relationships. There was something kind of nagging. I had had like a weird social interaction with a friend, and I came home and I just heard this voice say, "You're autistic." And I was like, oh, maybe that's it. Because there was still something. I mean, post awakening, there is this, as they say, the peace that passeth all understanding, right? There's that core of equanimity that couldn't be touched no matter what was going on. But yet I became more sensitive. And what was really happening was the layers were just falling. I wasn't adapting. I was just like more and more and more sensitive over the years. So I became like the princess and the pea, walking this razor's edge of like, like you'd feel it like kind of rubbing up against a situation or sensory input would just feel like too much. And I began to think, is this an awakening thing? Is this because, there's been a profound seeing that I'm this sensitive now? Like, what's going on? But really what I've learned, it's just been the continual unmasking of the adaptation strategies, which were covering up the fact that I have neurodivergent wiring.
One thing I'd love to ask you, as someone who I've been coming more into acknowledging a high level of sensitivity, one of the things I've become aware of is, when is that just truly what's happening? Okay, that's interesting. And do I use that ever in situations to get sympathy from people or even manipulate a situation? I'm very sensitive. I've noticed when I start talking about my own sensitivity, I'm like, I don't know if I really want to talk about this to people. Like, maybe I should just keep it to myself. So I'm curious I know you work with a lot of sensitive people, what your counsel is for people who identify with this high level of raw sensitivity to be really clean about it.
Yeah. I think we have to get honest with ourselves first. And so it almost doesn't matter if nobody else understands, or we don't necessarily have to explain it to anyone, but we have to sort of drop the shame and the should around acknowledging that, like, you know what, this situation is too much for my nervous system right now. I'm overstimulated. This scent is way too much. So to get honest with yourself about it, about, just owning that this is a truth for you. And I do notice that a lot of people have some sort of shame around it, or feeling like we should be different. We should just like suck it up and put on our big girl panties and just deal with it. It's life, which leads to burnout, and it leads to overstimulation. And, who knows, you might become a little more reactive in a situation, with a loved one as a result, because you're overstimulated. So, well, it's good that you notice that you're sensitive.
Right.
You
But
know
I
this
hear what
about
you're
yourself.
saying is really, first of all, just starting with telling yourself the truth
Yeah.
about what's going on in your experience. Now, you use this phrase in describing yourself as discovering that you were a high masking
Hmm.
neurodivergent woman. Tell me what you mean by masking and what the masking behaviors were that you identified you'd taken on.
Yeah. Yeah, masking can sound like it's, putting on a facade or something about identity, but it's really just masking these traits, so that we don't feel ostracized, so that we can be included, so that we can live a full life. So, I mean, I was in the stand-up comedy scene, and, you know, I just, my discomfort with a lot of overstimulation in it would just get masked, because it was like, well, this is what you do. This is what you do. And then I would burn out. So it's masking our natural sensitivities. It's masking our natural rhythms. Sensitive and neurodivergent people have rhythms that might be different from, neurotypical people. Masking our wants and our needs, how we really feel about something, speaking up, our authentic expression, just being authentic. And, as neurodivergent people, we tend to get told that we said the wrong thing, or we didn't quite do the thing the right way. And so there's years of sort of layers that build up of, oh yeah, right, you don't do that in a social situation, or oh right, you don't say that in a conversation, or you don't bring that up. So these are all ways that people can mask, or stimming. A lot of neurodivergent people have a lot of energy running through their system, and there's I'm sure you've heard of stimming, which is just moving the body. And, we go to a meditation retreat and we're told, like, be completely still. And I would feel all this energy moving through me. So, at times throughout my life, whether I was in the meditation zendo or, at a meeting or whatever, I was suppressing this desire to maybe move, and sort of disperse that energy. So, making eye contact, neurodivergent, especially autistic people, when I look into somebody's eyes, I get so much information about the person. That's like a really intense experience. So I masked that natural desire to look away, or, not make direct eye contact, by learning how to make direct eye contact. So I'm masking my natural rhythm, is to look away in a conversation. Although right now is fine. You have great hair.
Thank you. I like your glasses, and I like
Thank you.
actually looking into your eyes as well. I hope that's okay. Now, I
Yeah.
never heard of stimming. before. So that's
Hmm.
new to me. So
Yeah.
are you saying that the masking is keeping our body frozen when our natural instinct is
Yeah.
to let the
Yeah.
energy move? What does this word
Yeah.
stimming come from? What does that mean?
It means self-stimulation. So people just call it stimming. You can use fidget toys. You can, move your hands, move your. And I think as a child, I had a lot of like flapping my hands and moving, and I had little tics and things that I would do, and I learned how to be more still, which isn't a bad thing on one level, right? If you're, working with a Zen master again, but it's we have to kind of look at like, am I suppressing something? Am I suppressing something natural?
How do you relate to quote unquote masking now? I mean, do you have an
Yeah,
awareness and you make a choice like, oh, I don't think I'm going to shake right now in this
right.
experience. I think I'll shake later. Or how do you view it?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's some functional masking that we do, like it's, agreed upon in our society that we smile when we greet each other. I mean, that feels natural to me. I'm just using that as an example, but it's, there are certain ways that we operate to be part of a society. Like, how are you, Tami? Asking that's, kind of what we do. So, I always encourage people to unmask, but, there can be this defiant thing like, screw it, I'm not going to ask people how they are just because socially I'm, so, and that's a choice, of course, but we're all adapting in ways that might not feel natural. And so my advice to people is look at, does unmasking cause harm? We don't want to cause harm to ourselves, of course, but it's not going to kill me to make small talk with the checkout person at Trader Joe's. And small talk isn't really one of our favorite things. We like to have conversations like this, like we're having right now, just going deep and talking about big ideas and that type of thing. So yeah.
Well, I'll share with you a very brief example. I was at a party on Friday night and somebody said to me, "How are you?" And I looked away and I paused. And during that pause, I was checking my inner experience and I was so many different things. And
Oh
it
yeah.
took me a while before I was able to find a sentence and respond because I wanted to honestly answer how I was. And it wasn't, And so at a certain point, then, as I was still checking in inside, this gentleman put his arm on me and said, "Are you okay?"
Right.
And
Right.
I was like, "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just trying to, I'm definitely okay. I'm just trying to answer your question
Yeah.
honestly." But
Yeah.
anyway, that was an example of not being masked. And it led to a good connection, actually, as I
Yeah.
explained. But interesting. Now, Sarah, I want to see if we can bring a little more nuance. I mentioned
Yeah.
that you are a late diagnosed autistic woman, but that you also have ADHD. And I wonder, first of all, if you could parse
Sure.
the characteristics of those two different aspects of being neurodivergent from your own experience.
Yeah, from my own experience. Well, I was diagnosed with what would later be referred to as ADHD when I was a kid. So I was called a hyperkinetic kid, which is what they called us back then. And uh, my family didn't want to put me on medication, so we adjusted my diet a little bit, and then we all kind of forgot about it because there were so many kids in my family and there was a lot going on. So I forgot about the ADHD until a few years ago, which is very ADHD of me. ADHD is an inability to regulate attention. Um, there can be a feature to it that is a lot of energy. I have had that. Um, the ADHD brain doesn't quite know what is most important in a given situation. We're motivated by a fire in our pants, like either a deadline, we wait until the very last minute, or it has to be something that we engage in that is very, very interesting to us. which leads to a lot of issues. So thankfully, meditation was incredibly interesting to me. So I dove in. But people with ADHD have time blindness, which kind of is a feature of spiritual awakeness, of time kind of collapsing and you're just in the present moment all the time. But that can really lead to issues. Thriving on chaos. Lots of ideas, a wide mind that can hold a lot of different possibilities. And, traditionally we know with autism that it's a little bit more about rigidity and structure, black and white thinking, a need for repetitive movement or repetitive rituals, kind of an awkwardness with social situations. They do overlap. And I am not a neurodivergent expert. I just discovered this about myself a couple of years ago. So it's a process, but I just find that there are two parts of my brain, one that loves chaos, like you should see my desk right now, Tami. And then another part of me that, my system, my wiring that really craves ritual and something that grounds me every day. Or else I can, feel a little off sometimes. And of course, then I flow and am present with feeling off. But, if I had my druthers, I would, stick to a type of routine. So there are a lot of ADHD people out there, and there is an overlap. There are distinctions.
Now, this statement that really landed for me, neurodivergent people are wired for awakening. Let's try the opposite statement for a moment. Aren't neurotypical people also wired for awakening?
Sure.
Aren't all humans wired for awakening? Yeah. So, but I'm curious how you understand that, because maybe the process is different for neurotypical people, question mark? I don't know.
Let's explore this. Yes, being a human being, we're all meant to awaken to our true nature. We all have the capacity to. We all have Buddha nature, so it's accessible to us, right? I feel that neurodivergent people, and it's been my experience and with the people I've worked with over the years that either have identified as neurodivergent or highly sensitive or have been later realized. Tapping into true nature is, I don't want to say that's the easy part, but it's right there. And what I find with people is they miss over it. They miss these moments of real presence, of real their essence, because they're trying so hard to fit in with this world. Now, with neurotypical brain people, I mean, yeah, there are lots of people who are awakening. I think it's just that there is an exquisite sensitivity that this neurodivergent wiring makes it a little easier for us to open to the undifferentiated, to the unconditioned, to and also to multiplicity, the multiplicitous nature of the spiritual dimension. I mean, it struck me with what you were saying about answering that person at a party. We're complex processors. So it's like somebody might ask you, "How are you doing?" Well, there's so much going on. Like, where do we start? And it could take me, a minute before I answer. Neurodivergent people seem to have access to the multiple dimensions of reality because there's a lot going on.
Now, I realize, of course, Sarah, that you're not a neuroscientist and that you're coming at this from your own personal experience, but also that I think you're quite a sophisticated thinker and you're very well read and you've gone deep down the rabbit hole of neurodivergence and spirituality. As I said to you, you were tailor-made, for this series. But my question is, what is it in our neurological platform, if you will, from your understanding, that for neurodivergent people, that creates this openness, this porousness, this natural affinity with multidimensional awareness. How do you understand what is it? What's that affinity based on? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk to a neuroscientist about this, but I have read that for neurodivergent people, particularly, I guess, autistic people, and I could be wrong, it could be for all neurodivergent people, but I was reading that our parietal lobe has more folds, leading to less of a sense of self. And, you know, as we're on the spiritual path, we see through our ideas and our sense of what the self is. So the self is seems to be a little less defined in our experience. So that could be one thing. There are differences with the frontal lobe. It's a wiring. So, just to your question earlier about, you know, it's not like it's going to go away, you know.
What do you mean? It's not like it's gonna.
The neurodivergent wiring with one's
I
spiritual
got you.
opening or awakening, it's not going to change that we're neurodivergent. Well, now we're divergent because we've awakened or we've deepened on the spiritual path, but that initial wiring that apparently we're born with, I mean, that's still going to be in effect. Our relationship to it, how we work with it, how we move through the world, that's where we can to turn our attention to.
I'm going to ask you a kind of challenging question, if you
Sure.
will, because when I was reading about the progressive spiritual awakenings that you went through, and then in your experience, you hit a place of an abiding quality of realization. I thought, I'd really like to know more about that, the abiding part. What is abiding in your experience?
Yeah. Um, Prior to this shift, it was the lens of consciousness seemed to open and then shut back down. There was a vast opening. And then after a few months, a shutting down and conditioning coming up and trauma and working through it. So it was that I got it, I lost it phase that a lot of people kind of go through. But with this shift that occurred, there was never any doubt afterward of what I am or my access to it and it being right here. So this sense of this vast, infinite spaciousness that I am. And within that is the play of phenomena, thoughts and feelings and sensations and conditioning and trauma and reactions and, you know, um, all of it playing against this wider, more vast and fundamental backdrop. So, that has been my experience, which doesn't mean there hasn't been a lot of unraveling samskaras and knots and conditioning and, and just like this, discovering that I'm neurodivergent and having fun chewing on this now, and what that could mean. So, sometimes people say, well, is awakening sudden or gradual? I think for some people, there are sudden, distinctive moments, and it's always gradual, because there's always a deepening, there's always more falling away, there's always more embodiment. So this abiding sense of what I am doesn't go anywhere. And that's sort of like that equanimity, that canvas upon which everything is arising is always there. And, experiences vary. Different things are happening, but that doesn't go away.
You mentioned when quote unquote samskaras arise. Can you explain to people your understanding of samskaras and maybe give an example
Yeah.
of the arisal of one post this abiding awakening and how it became metabolized or you worked with it in your own experience?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say, relationship is our greatest teacher, right? So, um, I would get to a point in my relationship where I would just sort of, burst with this frustration. And, now looking back, I probably was having sensory overload meltdowns, but also woven into that were, you know, this conditioning of having gone through childhood trauma and having these habits of responding and reacting when I seem to be challenged, or you're in a difficult conversation with someone being attacked, right? So I would notice that, wow, I've had this profound awakening, this profound seeing, but my loved one can really push my buttons, right? So it's sort of, getting honest with myself, like, this is what's happening. I've lost my connection to something here. It's gone way in the background now instead of being foreground. It's like it's still there. I would be in a reactivity and also feel the great spacious awareness of what I am. But yet there's this, why am I habituated to respond this way? So then I turn my attention to the actual mechanism within me that wants to respond that certain way, and soften with it. Maybe after the conversation with the loved one, then sitting in meditation and being with the trigger. And what I have found is when we bring a love and an honesty, a compassion to what is happening, it can really begin to melt our conditioning. We want to see through it, right? Like, that's not who I am, and that's learned behavior, and it causes harm. It causes harm to my loved one and me, right? When I snap or whatever. But this clear seeing coupled with compassion, and you hear this a lot, that just awareness will eventually melt these knots, which I think it does, but awareness has a dry quality to it. We have to bring in the quality of compassion for ourselves, seeing where it came from, bringing ourselves back to these younger days when that reactivity first arose, and being with that aspect of ourself. I did a lot of kind of parts work, or different versions of myself, which sounds paradoxical if you've woken up from the sense of the separate self. Why are you talking to your inner child? And that never, at a certain point, the paradox never bothered me. It was just like, well, you know what? That's an energy that's here in my system. It's an energy template that's running, and I'm going to just give it love and give it the words that it wanted to hear back then at 5 or 4, at 8 years old. So for me, and with a lot of the people I work with, there's this welcoming aspect. It's not this kind of dry, penetrative insight. This causes me suffering. It's not who I am. It's impermanent. The 3 marks of existence, right? It's really, let's bring some love to it and acknowledge that it's here, and that compassion and awareness can sort of begin to melt it.
It's very helpful. And I think, Sarah, as we're talking, I'm getting more of the sense of sort of the inner map, if you will, that you're sharing. Because I think sometimes when people hear an abiding spiritual awakening, that doesn't go with a sensory overload,
Sure.
meltdown, freak out. Like, how could these things coexist? And yet you're describing in this gradual aspect of awakening that can be there even when there's been a huge sudden shift, that there are still often things like a sensory overload meltdown, but with love and awareness and welcoming, that can metabolize and process through. Did I say that
Yeah, yeah.
accurately?
It gets digested. I mean, it's been about 10 years since that non-dual awakening we're speaking of. And, conditioning's getting softer and softer and softer and softer. It's going to continue until we die. But but yeah, I think that's a real misunderstanding, or people really believe these myths that with any type of awakening, it's a one and done, it's a light switch moment, everything's groovy now. And we can see spiritual teachers get into trouble too. They're, oh gosh, their conditioning's coming up. Oh, their addictive tendencies around money and sex and misconduct. Isn't that interesting? They're so awake, but that's it. So I just am completely dedicated to keeping an eye to my conditioning, like until I go, because there are gonna be subtler and subtler ways in which it emerges.
Now, you work with many different kinds of people who identify as sensitive, neurodivergent, and more people who are looking for an awakening trail guide. I'm curious specifically, though, about people who are in their adult life who are discovering, I think like Sarah, I've been a high masking autistic. I think that's true. I'm just starting to see this. What do you see as the biggest challenges those people are facing, and how do you help them?
Yeah. Um, there's usually a lot of grief, like what could my life be like if I had known? Of course, there are many people who just feel like, hey, I've just figured out how to move through the world. This is how I am, whatever. And maybe they have a job that really fits them and their relationships. People have been understanding. And for whatever reason, it's like, okay. But for a majority of people, there's a real grief that needs to be reckoned with. And so I hold space for that grief, of we have to really honor what we've lost in order to step into what is present and what is here, you know. And just helping people become more authentic, it's the spiritual path helps us to become more authentic anyway. And once one realizes that they're neurodivergent, they have neurodivergent wiring, even if it's late in life, they're on an even deeper journey to become authentic, and they of course overlap. So I notice that when I hold space for people to just make room for however they are, as, effed up as they are, or angry as they are, or grief stricken, or weird, or whatever it is that they're kind of resisting a little bit, and we sit in it, that I don't know, often people will drop right down through into true nature. Um, I know a woman who late 60s has had some profound shifts in consciousness, and through our talking began to realize, oh wow, I'm autistic, and she sat with her grief, and sat with this recognition of this, and she's just dropped right into a deeper non-dual state that's been abiding since this recognition. So look, we're on the spiritual path wanting to recognize our true nature. But I think the path is also about recognizing our personhood, and that it's both, our absolute nature and our relative nature, our pure fundamental essence and our unique individuality. And that together, that brings an integrated life,
One of the things I wonder about is the utility and also the lack of utility and even harm that comes from labeling ourselves in all different kinds of ways. And, I even think of, everything I went through. I thought androgynous, my sexual orientation. How am I going to describe myself to people? And, can I just be me, please? But, yes,
Right.
I have labels and I can do all that. And now I'm in this process of exploring my own neurodivergence and all the possible labels and which ones fit, and do they fit forever or do they just fit now? And and part of me is like, really? Like, is this, how
Yeah.
useful is it? Or is it just like, why would I put this mysterious being in this box. Is it
Yeah.
good? And I'm curious how you see that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I wondered that too. I mean, I think over the years there was something a little nagging where I was like, I wonder if I'm autistic. And then to be like, well, who cares now, right? So that night that I heard that voice and I just went, oh, I'm meant to go down this path and learn about this. Look, labels can stifle us and box us in, and they can also set us free. I look at it like, and this is probably my autistic wiring. I'm like, oh, there's certain sets of behavior and ways of seeing that somebody with my wiring has. So it's really helpful for me to learn about that and learn about all the ways that I see things differently or might need something differently than the next person. I mean, I just remember years ago when somebody gave me the label codependent, and I was like, oh, do I really want to take on another label? And then I just looked at it like, hey, there are these sets of behaviors that come with being codependent. I don't really identify as a codependent, but I'm going to look at these behaviors and this kind of wiring that I have and let it be useful. It's more knowledge, right? It's, if we're a seeker of truth, why not learn what's true about us? And of course, many things can be true at once. You're not a neurodivergent person, and at the same time, you are like you're more than that. And also, there might be some limitations and some unique ways that you move through the world because of it. And so we can then start to embrace like, well, what are the gifts of this? And like, and what about it is a disability so that I can care for myself better. But, hey, some people, later in life, they've already kind of figured that out. Um, so I think it's going to be individual. It's going to be unique for everybody.
How have you experienced your neurodivergence as a disability?
Um, I think through my life, I couldn't handle a lot of uh, a lot of things at once, a lot of demands at once. So hyperfocus is something that comes with ADHD and autism, and that's that capacity, that ability to hone in on something and just lock in, right? And it's wonderful. It can be a great gift, and I'm sure symphonies have been created from hyperfocus and companies and whatnot. Um, but it can be a disability when you are ignoring that, like, the garbage truck is outside, and you're getting a ticket for having your car still parked out there. So there was always this feeling in my life like there was too much going on because of the complex way I process. I can see several truths at once. You know, I would often just become uh, unable to move forward in my life at various times. Um, Executive functioning. Sometimes, I was a waitress for a while. I know you used to waitress. I was a terrible waitress because I couldn't prioritize. I think it was the ADHD in me. It was like, well, wait a minute, which that table sat down, but then this table over here. And then like, well, who needs their water first? And it was, I was overwhelmed. I was overstimulated. Now, here I am later in my life. I've just created a life that works for me. So, I'm not experiencing the disability that I did in my youth. Um, so, and I do want to make it clear too that there are people who, have, there are different levels to autism. So I'm considered level 1 Asperger's, which we don't use anymore. And there's level 2 and there's level 3. And, some people don't like the levels. It's just about support needs. High support needs, low support needs. So someone like me is considered low support needs, but we still need support. Like I work with an ADHD coach and she's great. She just keeps me focused, keeps me on track. I check in with her every week because otherwise especially after opening up to, I really have time blindness. So it's been helpful, like to be able to say like, okay, I need a little more support. And so I'm going to get it.
Okay, I just have two final questions for you,
Yeah.
Sarah. The first one here is kind of a public service announcement, if you will, for people listening who maybe at this moment in our conversation are like, wow, I've really heard a lot here. I feel very stirred up. I mean, just by talking about raw, exquisite sensitivity and overwhelm, let alone everything that's been shared about spiritual awakening and different aspects of neurodivergence, I'm overwhelmed at this moment. What would you say to such a person to help them be with themselves in a loving way?
Yeah. I think this compassion piece is so important, and keeping things very, very simple. What do you know for sure in this moment? What do you need in this moment? And there's something that I do with people when they feel like they've been pulled in a lot of directions. And sometimes when we take in a lot of information about something, we start to feel our energy leaking and going out towards the future. And well, what does this mean? And so this is just a little exercise, if I may, of just bringing your attention to your center. So like from your heart down to your navel, just imagining there, and you can close your eyes if you want, a sun, just a big bright sun. This is your power center, your unique essence. And just breathing into this light and allowing it to get big. And as you exhale, just relaxing with this light and this power here. And you're going to reclaim your power, all the energy that you've leaked and scattered and given away by saying yes when you meant no, or smiling when you didn't feel like it. We leak and scatter our energy when we ruminate on the past, or we obsess on the future, when we haven't been authentic. So take a deep breath into the center. And as you exhale, all your energy comes back to you now. Effortlessly and easily, it just comes back. It's yours. And you're right here with your body, with your breath. And it's safe to just be here right now as you are. And you don't have to figure anything out. Just keep coming back to your body and your breath. Sort of a gathering up of oneself, you know. And then I'd say when you feel ready, start learning. There are wonderful creators on YouTube. Women tend to not get diagnosed with neurodivergence because we mask better. That's a really important point that I wanted to bring forward. That gets missed, And there are wonderful creators on YouTube talking about this. Dr. Devin Price has a great book on unmasking. Jenna Narenberg wrote a book called Divergent Mind, which can be kind of an open door into learning about this. And it's being talked about more, Open up to friends, open up to loved ones. And you might be surprised. People say, hey, you know what? I think I'm autistic too. Or you know what, that is me. I just got diagnosed. Didn't want to tell anybody, And there's again, a lot of women realizing this, female identified. And there are a lot of people in perimenopause and menopause who are sort of waking up to the fact that they're neurodivergent because they're not masking anymore. Their sensitivity is increasing. And so there are a lot of people over the age of 40, male or female, just, or non-binary or gender fluid, realizing this, that, wow, I've spent my whole life a certain way. And what if there's a way to be more authentic? What if there's something going on that is asking me to connect more deeply to my body and my own being?
All right. Here's the last thing I want to ask you. I'd love to get your perspective on this, which is for 2 decades now, Sounds True's worked with Eckhart Tolle, the author of The Power of Now, and he talks about something that he calls the flowering of human consciousness. And just in brief, that more and more people are awakening, going through spiritual awakenings at this time, and that this is going to increase, just like in the biological evolution on the earth, there were a few flowers at a certain point, and then more flowers opened and more flowers, and they were going through this flowering. So when I hear you say neurodivergent people are wired for awakening, I wonder, is the discovery of our neurodivergence and more potentially perhaps neurodivergent people being born, more of us recognizing and identifying with that part of this evolutionary process that we're in, that's connected to the evolutionary process of awakening? And how do you see that?
I think it might be. I am of that mind that there are more of us, and we're realizing that there are more of us. So what are these structures that have been put in place for people with systems that don't quite fit in it? And I do think there are more people awakening. I mean, just 20 years ago when this was dawning for me, as I mentioned to you, I couldn't find a lot about post-awakening terrain on YouTube or on the internet, and it's all over the place. And I just, the amount of people that come to me and say, I just downloaded this, this meditation app, and I've realized myself as luminous emptiness. What is going on? Like, there are a lot of people who are awakening that don't have context, and so, but the point being that I think there are more. I think there are more people awakening, and the divergent brain, perhaps it is an evolutionary thing. And as with evolution, it's this balance that is trying to find its way. It could be, yeah.
Sarah Taylor, thank you so much for being part of our series on spirituality and the neurodivergent mind. I really benefited a lot from talking with you. Thank you.
Tami, thanks for having me. It's been really, really a delight. So thanks.
Thanks, friends. And if you'd like to watch Insights at the Edge on video and participate in the after-show Q&A session with our guests, come join us on Sounds True 1, a new membership community featuring award-winning original shows, live classes, community learning, guided meditations, and more with the leading wisdom teachers of our time. Use promo code PODCAST to get your first month free. You can learn more at join.soundstrue.com. Sounds True, waking up the world. The Sounds True Podcast Network.